Next case, Samuel Johnson. Charges of vagrancy and loitering. How do you plead, Mr. Johnson? Let's make this quick. We have a busy docket. The voice of Judge Harrison boomed through the small, stuffy courtroom. It was a voice used to being obeyed, a voice that rarely softened. If you believe everyone deserves to be heard with respect, no matter how they look, type "listen" in the comments below. Samuel Johnson stood before the high bench. He was an older black man, his clothes neat but clearly worn from many nights spent on unforgiving streets. His shoulders, though slumped with a weariness that went deeper than just lack of sleep, still held a hint of a ramrod straightness from a life lived long ago. His eyes, though, were tired, so very tired. He clutched a tattered baseball cap in his hands, twisting the brim. He had been here before, in similar rooms, facing similar accusations. It was the price of being homeless, of having nowhere else to go. "Your Honor," Samuel began, his voice quiet, a little rough from disuse but steady. "I plead not guilty to loitering. I was just trying to find some shade." Judge Harrison sighed, a theatrical sound of impatience. He shuffled papers on his desk, not really looking at Samuel. "Shade, of course. And the vagrancy? Where do you live, Mr. Johnson?" Samuel swallowed. This was always the hardest part. I don't have a permanent residence right now, Your Honor." "No permanent residence," the judge repeated, as if this confirmed all his assumptions. "So, homeless. Another drain on the city's resources. We offer shelter beds, you know. Why aren't you using them?" Samuel looked down at his cap. How could he explain the crowded noise, the fear of theft, the loss of the little dignity he had left in those places? How could he explain that sometimes the cold concrete under a distant, silent star felt safer, more private? "The shelters, they are not always suitable for everyone, Your Honor," he said softly. The judge leaned back, his expression stern. "Not suitable? Or you just don't like the rules? Look, Mr. Johnson, the law is the law. If you're loitering, you're breaking it. If you have no means and no place to go, you fit the description of vagrancy. It's simple." Samuel felt a familiar wave of despair wash over him. He was invisible, just another nameless, faceless problem for the city to deal with. He thought of long nights spent huddled in doorways, of days spent walking endlessly to keep warm, of the gnawing hunger that was his constant companion. He remembered a time when his name meant something, when he wore a uniform with pride, when he gave orders and men listened. Now he was just Mr. Johnson, a nuisance. He had served his country for over 20 years. He had fought in places most people only saw on the news. He had seen things, done things, things that still visited him in his dreams. He had medals, commendations, tucked away in a small, waterproof pouch he always kept with him, proof of a life that seemed like it belonged to someone else. What good were those memories now? What good were those medals when he stood here, judged by the worn state of his clothes and his lack of a street address? "Is there anything else you wish to say before I pass sentence?" the judge asked, his pen already poised. He clearly expected nothing more than a mumbled apology or a plea for leniency. Samuel took a deep breath. He had tried to be respectful, he had tried to explain, but he was tired of being dismissed. A spark of his old self, the part of him that had commanded respect, flickered to life. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, his voice a little stronger now. "For the record, my full name is Samuel David Johnson." The judge barely looked up. "Samuel David Johnson. Noted. Anything else relevant to these charges of vagrancy and loitering, Mr. Johnson?" Samuel stood a little straighter. "Yes, Your Honor. Sergeant Major Samuel David Johnson, United States Army, retired." The courtroom was quiet. The clerk typing suddenly paused. The bailiff, who had been looking bored by the door, shifted his weight. Judge Harrison stopped writing. He slowly put his pen down. He looked, truly looked, at Samuel for the first time. There was a faint frown on his face, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Sergeant Major?" the judge repeated, his voice losing some of its booming confidence. "Did you say Sergeant Major Samuel David Johnson?" "Yes, Your Honor," Samuel confirmed, his gaze steady. The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, not in anger now, but in intense scrutiny. Were you by any chance attached to the 75th Ranger Regiment?" A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the usual rustling of papers and whispered conversations from the public gallery ceased. Samuel met the judge's gaze. "I was, Your Honor, for 12 years. Battalion Sergeant Major, 3rd Ranger Battalion, before my retirement. Judge Harrison's face changed. The stern, impatient mask crumbled. His eyes widened slightly. He looked down at the file in front of him, then back at the man standing there in worn clothes, a man he had been about to dismiss with a fine and a few days in jail. Samuel David Johnson, the judge murmured, almost to himself. He ran a hand over his face. Known as Iron Mike Johnson? A small, sad smile touched Samuel's lips. Some of my men called me that, Your Honor, a long time ago. The judge stared. It was as if he was seeing a ghost. He pushed his chair back slowly. The screech of its legs on the polished floor was loud in the sudden, complete silence of the room. He stood up. Judge Harrison, a man known for his stern demeanor and his adherence to the letter of the law, stood up behind his high bench. And then, he did something no one in that courtroom had ever seen him do. He straightened his robes. He looked directly at at Sergeant Major Samuel David Johnson. Sergeant Major, Judge Harrison said, his voice now filled with a respect that bordered on awe. Would you permit this court to see your service record, if you have it? Samuel hesitated for a moment, then reached inside his worn jacket. He pulled out a small, oilskin pouch. From it, he carefully extracted a folded, laminated card, his military ID, and a few carefully preserved documents. He handed them to the bailiff, who approached him with a new deference. The bailiff carried them to the judge. Judge Harrison took the documents. He looked at the ID. He unfolded one of the papers. His eyes scanned it, then scanned it again. The courtroom held its breath. What could possibly be on those papers to make a judge react this way? If you believe our veterans deserve honor, type "never forget" in the comments. The judge's face went pale. He put the papers down on the bench as if they were heavy. He looked at Samuel, then at the papers, then back at Samuel. Bailiff, Judge Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. Read the commendations, aloud. The bailiff, a young man who himself had served a tour overseas, picked up the top document. He cleared his throat. For Sergeant Major Samuel David Johnson, the bailiff began, his voice gaining strength as he read. The Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism and action, while engaged in military operations involving conflict with an opposing foreign force. Sergeant Major Johnson, with complete disregard for his own safety, exposed himself to heavy enemy fire to rescue 3 wounded comrades trapped in a burning vehicle. The bailiff continued reading, his voice echoing in the stunned silence. He read of silver stars, bronze stars for valor, purple hearts. He read of tours in places that were now just history, of battles fought and won, of leadership that saved lives. He read of a career spanning over 2 decades, dedicated to service, to sacrifice. With each word, the story of the man standing before them changed. He was no longer just a homeless man, a vagrant. He was a hero, a decorated hero. When the bailiff finished, there was a profound silence, not an empty silence, but one filled with unspoken emotions, shock, shame, and a dawning, immense respect. Judge Harrison stood very still. He looked at Samuel, and his eyes were now shining. Sergeant Major Johnson, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Then, louder, so everyone could hear, this court, this nation, owes you a debt that can never truly be repaid. He took a deep breath, and then he did the most unexpected thing. Judge Harrison stood even taller. He faced Samuel directly, and he brought his hand up in a sharp, precise salute. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the bailiff, standing beside the judge's bench, also snapped to attention and saluted. A court officer near the door, an older man with service ribbons visible on his uniform from his own time in the military, slowly rose to his feet and saluted. Then, one by one, others in the courtroom began to stand. Lawyers, clerks, people waiting for their own cases, even some of the other defendants in the holding area. They stood. Some, who knew, saluted. Others simply stood in silent respect. The entire courtroom was rising. For Sergeant Major Samuel David Johnson, the homeless man, the hero. Samuel looked around, his eyes wide, a flicker of confusion, then understanding, then a profound sadness mixed with a reluctant pride. He slowly, almost hesitantly, brought his own hand up, returning the judge's salute with the practiced precision of a lifetime. His back was straighter now, his shoulders less slumped. For a moment, the weight of the years, the hunger, the cold nights seemed to lift. Judge Harrison held the salute for a long moment, then slowly lowered his hand. His face was etched with shame and humility. "Sergeant Major," he said, his voice choked, "the charges against you are dismissed, with the deepest apologies of this court." He looked at his clerk. "Strike this case from the record. All charges expunged." He then turned back to Samuel. "Sir," he said, using the honorific with genuine reverence, "I am profoundly sorry for how you were treated here today, for how this system has clearly failed you." The judge's eyes scanned the courtroom, now fully standing. "We, as a society, make promises to those who serve. We promise to care for them, to honor them. Today, in this courtroom, we almost broke that promise in the most shameful way." He looked directly at Samuel. "This will be rectified immediately." The judge motioned to the bailiff. "Bailiff, please escort Sergeant Major Johnson to my chambers. Get him some coffee, something to eat. Contact the Veterans Affairs liaison for this courthouse immediately. I want a full support package activated for him. Housing, medical, benefits, everything he is entitled to, and more." "Yes, Your Honor," the bailiff said, his voice crisp with a new sense of purpose. Judge Harrison then addressed the still-standing courtroom. "Let what happened here today be a lesson to all of us, a lesson in humility, a lesson in not judging a book by its cover. A lesson that heroes walk among us, often unseen, often in need. It is our duty, not just as officers of the court, but as citizens, to see them, to honor them, and to help them." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "This court is adjourned until this afternoon, and may we all do better." As the judge left the bench, people slowly began to sit, but the atmosphere in the room had changed forever. Whispers filled the air, not of gossip, but of awe and reflection. The bailiff gently guided a stunned Samuel Johnson towards the judge's chambers. As he walked, people parted respectfully. Some reached out to touch his arm. Others just nodded, their eyes filled with gratitude and apology. In the judge's chambers, things moved quickly. The VA liaison, a compassionate woman named Maria Sanchez, arrived within minutes. She listened intently as the judge, his voice still shaking with emotion, explained the situation. Maria looked at Samuel with kind eyes. "Sergeant Major," she said softly, "it's an honor to meet you. We're going to take care of everything." And they did. Within hours, Samuel was in a clean, warm room at a transitional housing facility specifically for veterans. He had new clothes. He had a hot meal, the best he'd had in years. A doctor checked him over, addressing ailments he had long ignored. Appointments were made. Benefits he hadn't known he was entitled to were fast-tracked. Judge Harrison personally visited him later that day, not as a judge, but as a fellow citizen, humbled and grateful. He sat with Samuel, not asking about the war, but about his life now, his needs, his hopes. He apologized again, profusely. "It is I who should apologize, Judge," Samuel said quietly, looking at the clean sheets on his bed, "for losing my way, for not asking for help sooner." "Nonsense, Sergeant Major," the judge said firmly. "You have nothing to apologize for. We, the system, we failed to see you. We failed to reach out. That changes now, starting with you and starting in my courtroom." The story of what happened in Judge Harrison's courtroom spread. It was a stark reminder of the sacrifices made by so many and the struggles they can face upon returning to civilian life. The local news picked it up, not naming Samuel directly to protect his privacy, but telling the story of the homeless hero in court. It sparked a local initiative. More funding was allocated for veteran outreach programs. The courthouse implemented new screening protocols to identify veterans early in the legal process to ensure they received support, not just judgment. Samuel, with the help he now received, slowly began to rebuild his life. He found a small apartment. He reconnected with some old Army buddies. He even started volunteering at the VA, helping other veterans navigate the system, sharing his quiet strength. He never boasted about what happened in that courtroom, but he carried himself with a renewed sense of dignity. He was no longer invisible. He was Sergeant Major Samuel David Johnson, retired, a hero who had been lost and then found. The lesson from that day was clear. Respect is due to everyone, and true worth is not measured by wealth or appearance, but by character and service. Heroes are all around us. Sometimes they just need us to open our eyes and see them. If you believe that our veterans are treasures and deserve our unending support, Please subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and remind us of the best of humanity. What will you do today to honor a veteran in your community?